The air in the Drake Grand Ballroom, thick with the scent of lilies and old money, was about to be shattered by a scandal years in the making. For 5 years, Selina Drake had played the perfect wife to a titan of industry. Her every move polished her every smile, a testament to their perfect life. But tonight, 7 months pregnant, and pushed to the absolute edge of her endurance, the facade was set to crumble. What you are about to hear is not just a story of betrayal, but of a quiet, calculated revenge enacted in front of the 1%. It's a story of how a woman seemingly stripped of her dignity, the one weapon her powerful husband never saw coming, his own father's words. The Drake estate, a sprawling neo-Gothic marvel nestled in the Emerald Hills of North Salem, New York, was Selina Drake's prison. It was a beautiful prison, to be sure, with walls of hand-carved mahogany windows that stretched from floor to ceiling, offering panoramic views of the Hudson Valley, and floors of Italian marble so polished she could see the reflection of her own strained smile. For 5 years, she had been its chatelaine. The elegant wife of Walter Drake, a man who had inherited a significant fortune and through sheer ruthless ambition multiplied it tenfold. Tonight was the annual Drake Foundation Gala, the glittering pinnacle of the New York social calendar. It was an evening Walter orchestrated with the precision of a military campaign, every detail a testament to his power and influence. And Selina, as always, was his most prized ornament. She stood before the full-length mirror in their master suite, the deep sapphire of her custom maternity gown cascading over the pronounced curve of her belly. The baby, a boy they had already named Spencer, kicked gently, a secret flutter of life that was hers and hers alone. Walter had been distant about the pregnancy. He'd provided the best doctors, the finest prenatal care money could buy. But his interest was clinical, as if he were monitoring a promising but volatile asset. The warmth, the shared joy she had naively expected was absent. Is the necklace on straight Walter's voice, smooth and cold, as the marble floors cut through her thoughts. He emerged from his dressing room, a titan in a tailored Tom Ford tuxedo. His eyes, the color of faded denim, didn't meet hers in the mirror. Instead, they were fixed on the diamond and sapphire monstrosity clasped around her neck, the Drake star. It was a family heirloom heavy with the weight of generations, and tonight it felt like a yoke. I think so, she murmured, her fingers tracing the icy stones. Don't think. No. He stepped behind her, his large hands making a minute adjustment. His touch was impersonal, like a curator arranging an exhibit. Everything must be perfect tonight. The governor is attending. The Van Houten family is flying in from Brussels. Everything is always perfect, Walter. She said the words, tasting like ash. His eyes finally met hers in the reflection. For a fleeting second, she saw the man she'd fallen in love with, the charming, ambitious go-getter who had swept her off her feet, a librarian from a modest background, and promised her the world. But the warmth was quickly extinguished, replaced by the familiar appraising glint of a CEO evaluating his stock. Good, he said, turning away. The car is waiting. Don't be late. I need to greet our guests. He left without a backward glance. Selina closed her eyes, taking a deep, shuddering breath. The loneliness in this opulent house was a physical presence, a constant, silent companion. Over the past year, Walter's distance had grown into a chasm. Late nights at the office became entire weekends away. Business trips were extended without explanation. His phone, once left casually on the nightstand, was now guarded like a state secret. She wasn't a fool. She knew. Downstairs, the low thrum of the arriving guests was a prelude to the evening's performance. The family was already there. Walter's mother, Margaret, a woman whose spirit had been ironed out by decades of Drake tradition, would be watching with her perpetually anxious eyes. His younger brother, Robert, perpetually simmering with a resentment born from living in Walter's shadow, would be lurking in a corner nursing a whiskey and a grudge. They were not her allies. In this family, you were either with Walter or you were irrelevant. Selina placed a protective hand on her stomach. "Just a little longer, Spencer," she whispered to the life within her. "I promise you it will be different." For months she had been preparing. She had not been idle in her gilded cage. While Walter was busy building his empire and indulging his appetites, she had been quietly studying, learning, and remembering. She had spent countless hours in the estate's vast library, the one place she felt truly at peace. It was there, amidst the leather-bound first editions and the scent of aging paper, that she had found her courage. It was there she had discovered the words of a man who had seen Walter's flaws long before she had his own father, the late George Drake. George had been a different kind of man, stern but fair. He saw the world in terms of legacy, not just profit margins. He had been kind to Selina, seeing in her a quiet strength that he feared his own son lacked. In their long conversations before his passing 2 years ago, he had spoken of his fears for the future of the Drake name. As Selina descended the grand staircase, the crystal chandeliers casting 1,000 fractured rainbows across the room, she felt the weight of every condescending glance, every whispered comment she had endured for years. They saw her as a trophy, a pretty, placid creature Walter had acquired. Tonight they would see something else entirely. Tonight she wasn't just Walter Drake's wife. She was George Drake's chosen guardian, and the performance was about to begin. The grand ballroom was a symphony of calculated excess. An orchestra played softly in the corner, their music a tasteful backdrop to the clinking of champagne flutes and the murmur of powerful conversations. Waitstaff moved like ghosts, their silver trays laden with caviar and other delicacies. Selina navigated the room with a practiced grace, her smile a carefully constructed mask. She exchanged pleasantries with senators, shook hands with CEOs, and nodded graciously at the wives who eyed her gown with a mixture of envy and pity. Walter was in his element, a king holding court. He stood near the towering French doors that led to the terrace, a circle of influential men hanging on his every word. He laughed, a booming, confident sound that commanded attention. Selina watched him, a cold knot tightening in her stomach. He hadn't looked her way once since they'd arrived. "You look radiant, dear Margaret," Drake said, appearing at Selina's side. Her smile was as fragile as antique lace. "Pregnancy suits you." "Thank you, Margaret," Selina replied, forcing warmth into her voice. "Walter is in high spirits tonight." Margaret added, her gaze flickering towards her son. It was as close to a warning as she was capable of giving. She knew in that passive, silent way of hers that something was wrong in her son's marriage. But she would never dare to voice it. The Drake code was to maintain appearances no matter the cost. Robert slouched over, a cynical smirk playing on his lips. "Quite the show, isn't it, Kathy? My brother, the master of the universe. Just be glad you're the one on his arm, and not managing the Drake shipping subsidiary in Baltimore." "Robert," Margaret chided weakly. "What? It's true." He shrugged, taking a large gulp of his drink. "He gets the glory, I get the grit. And you, my dear sister-in-law, get the gilded cage." He winked at her, a gesture that was more conspiratorial than kind. He enjoyed the drama, a spectator hoping for the eventual implosion of his brother's perfect life. Selina ignored him, her attention drawn to a sudden stir at the ballroom entrance. A woman had just arrived, and her entrance had the effect of a stone tossed into a still pond, sending ripples of silence through the crowd. She was stunning in a way that was the complete antithesis of Selina's classic elegance. Her gown was a slash of crimson silk that clung to every curve her hair, a cascade of jet-black curls, and her lips painted a defiant matching red. She exuded a raw, almost predatory confidence. Her eyes scanned the room, bypassing everyone else, and landed squarely on Walter. A collective unspoken understanding seemed to pass through the guests. Husbands subtly shifted their stances. Wives' smiles became brittle. This was not a business associate. Selina's heart hammered against her ribs. She didn't need an introduction. She had seen the candid paparazzi photos online, the ones her lawyer had discreetly compiled into a thick, damning file. She had seen the credit card statements for lavish gifts sent to a private address in the city. Giselle Dubois, a consultant according to the tabloids, a rising star in the art world whose career had mysteriously skyrocketed in the past year, thanks to a very wealthy, very married anonymous benefactor. Walter's booming laugh faltered. He saw Giselle, and for a moment, a flicker of something annoyance, panic crossed his face. But it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by a mask of arrogant nonchalance. He excused himself from his circle and moved to intercept her before she came any further into the room. Their exchange was brief, a low murmur of words she couldn't hear. But she could see his body language. He wasn't angry. He wasn't dismissing her. He was placating her. He placed a hand on the small of her back, a gesture of casual intimacy that was like a physical blow to Selina, and guided her towards a quieter alcove. The entire ballroom watched. The whispers started quiet at first, then growing in volume like the buzz of angry hornets. Margaret's face had gone pale, her hand clutching the pearls at her throat. Robert was watching with undisguised glee, his eyes darting between Walter and Selina, savoring the impending collision. Selina stood frozen, the blood roaring in her ears. Humiliation, hot and sharp, washed over her. He had brought his mistress here, to her home, to the Drake Foundation. Gala, an event that bore his family's name, a name he was supposed to honor. He had done it in front of everyone, his mother, his brother, his business partners, the press that would inevitably be sniffing for a story. He was making a statement. He was telling the world and her that he was beholden to no rules, that he could have it all, the respectable pregnant wife and the fiery, beautiful mistress, and he dared anyone to challenge him. She felt a hand on her arm. It was Jonathan Hawthorne, her late father-in-law's lawyer and executor of his estate. He was a kind, stoic man in his late 60s, with eyes that held a deep-seated integrity. "Selina," he said, his voice a low anchor in the storm of her emotions. "Are you all right?" She turned to him, her carefully constructed mask finally cracking. He saw the pain in her eyes. He more than anyone knew what was at stake. He had been her secret counsel for the past 6 months. "He's daring me, Jonathan," she whispered, her voice trembling. "In front of everyone." Mr. Hawthorne's expression was grim. He looked from Selina's stricken face to Walter, who was now smiling, laughing with Giselle as if it were the most natural thing in the world. George Drake was a wise man. Selina, the lawyer, said, his voice firm but gentle. He foresaw this. He foresaw his son's character. The documents are in my briefcase, as you requested. You only need to say the word." Selina looked at the reflection of the woman in the crimson dress in a nearby mirror. She saw the smug, triumphant curve of Giselle's smile. Then she looked at her own reflection. She saw the strain, the sleepless nights, the quiet agony of her marriage's slow death. And then she felt it again, the gentle, insistent kick from within her. Spencer, her son, the future of the Drake name. This wasn't just about her pride anymore. This was about the legacy George had entrusted to her. This was for her child. She straightened her shoulders, the weight of the Drake star on her neck no longer feeling like a burden, but like armor. "Thank you, Jonathan," she said, her voice devoid of its earlier tremor. It was now steady and cold as steel. "Stay close. The time is coming." As dinner concluded, a hush fell over the ballroom. It was time for the evening's main event, Walter's speech. It was an annual tradition, a moment for him to report on the Foundation's successes, to charm his donors, and to solidify his position as the benevolent patriarch of the Drake dynasty. He took to the stage at the front of the room, a single spotlight illuminating him. He looked every bit the master of his universe, his smile broad and charismatic, his posture exuding an unshakable confidence. He began with practiced ease, his voice resonating through the microphone, speaking of charity, of responsibility, of the great Drake legacy. Selina watched from the head table, an island of forced calm in a sea of tension. To her left, her mother-in-law Margaret was twisting a linen napkin in her lap. To her right, Robert was leaning back in his chair, a look of predatory anticipation on his face. She could feel the eyes of the other guests on her, their gazes shifting from her to Walter, and then to the corner table, where Giselle Dubois sat watching Walter with an expression of pure adoration. Walter had insisted she be given a seat, an act of defiance so blatant it had rendered even his own mother speechless. This past year, Walter was saying, his voice swelling with pride, "Drake Industries has seen unprecedented growth. We have expanded into new markets, forged new alliances, and our stock has reached an all-time high." But true success, he paused, letting the words hang in the air, is not measured in dollars and cents. It is measured in legacy, in building something that lasts. He scanned the room, his eyes gliding past Selina's as if she were a piece of furniture. A legacy is not built alone. It requires vision, strength, and inspiration. It requires surrounding yourself with people who challenge you, who push you to be greater than you thought possible. People who are not bound by tired conventions, but who possess a fire, a passion for life that is truly invigorating. His gaze drifted and then settled with deliberate, unmistakable meaning on Giselle. The woman in the crimson dress positively glowed under his attention, a small, triumphant smile playing on her lips. A wave of murmurs rippled through the audience. This was no longer a speech about charity. It was a public declaration. Selina felt the blood drain from her face. Her hands resting on her swollen belly grew cold. The baby kicked a sharp, sudden movement, as if sensing his mother's distress. Walter continued, his voice taking on a new, almost cruel-edged tone. "We must all be bold. We must cast off that which holds us back. Complacency is the enemy of progress. Timidity is the death of ambition. True partners in life are not those who offer quiet, predictable comfort, but those who offer a spark, a brilliant, dazzling spark that ignites your own soul." Every word was a perfectly sharpened dagger, aimed directly at Selina's heart. Quiet, predictable, comfort. He was describing her dismissing their 5 years of marriage, their shared life, their unborn child, as nothing more than a placid, uninspiring backdrop to his grand existence. He raised his glass. And so tonight I want to propose a toast, not just to the foundation, not just to our continued success, but to the future, a future of boldness, of passion, and of unapologetic truth. His eyes locked with Giselle's across the room. The connection was electric, a flagrant display of their bond for all to see. To inspiration, he said, his voice ringing with finality. Wherever you may find it. He drank deeply. The applause that followed was scattered and uncertain. The guests were stunned. They had come for a charity gala and had instead been served a front-row seat to the most brutal and public marital execution they had ever witnessed. Walter Drake had not just acknowledged his mistress. He had lauded her, praised her as the source of his greatness, while his pregnant wife sat mere feet away. The humiliation was complete. It was a searing physical pain that stole the air from Selina's lungs. She saw it all in a blur, the shocked faces of the guests, the pity in some eyes, the morbid curiosity in others. She saw Margaret close her eyes in shame, and Robert grin like a jackal that had just spotted a kill. She saw Giselle preening under the spotlight of Walter's affection, the victor claiming her prize. For a moment, all she wanted to do was run. To flee the hundreds of prying eyes, to hide herself away, and shatter into a million pieces. The tears burned behind her eyes, and a wave of dizziness washed over her. But then she felt it again. The strong, steady kick of her son. Spencer. This was not his legacy. His legacy would not begin with his mother's public humiliation. It would not be defined by his father's infidelity and cruelty. A strange, preternatural calm settled over her. The roaring in her ears subsided. The dizziness passed. The hot tears receded, replaced by an icy resolve. The pain was still there, a hot coal in her chest, but it was no longer a debilitating force. It was fuel. Walter was returning to his seat, basking in the shock and awe he had created. He was a man who believed he was untouchable, that his wealth and power had placed him above consequence. He had made a grave miscalculation. He had mistaken her quietness for weakness, her dignity for passivity. As he sat down, he glanced at her, a flicker of a smirk on his face, as if expecting to see her destroyed. Instead, he saw her slowly, deliberately place her napkin on the table. He saw her push her chair back. He saw her rise to her feet, her posture as straight and unyielding as a marble column. Every eye in the room swiveled to her. The silence was now absolute, a thick, heavy blanket of anticipation. Walter's smirk vanished, replaced by a look of stunned disbelief, then irritation. What did she think she was doing? Selina's hand rested protectively on her stomach. She looked not at her husband, but out at the sea of powerful, influential faces. "My husband," she began, her voice perfectly clear, amplified by the silent tension in the room, spoke of legacy. She paused, letting the words echo. Then she turned her head, and her cool, steady gaze finally met Walter's. "You speak of a future of boldness and unapologetic truth, Walter." "I agree. So let's talk about your father's true legacy. And let's be unapologetically truthful about it, shall we?" Walter stared at her, his face a thunderous mask of rage and confusion. He had expected tears, a quiet retreat, a scene in private later. He had not expected this public defiance. Selina sitted down. He hissed his voice, a low, dangerous growl meant only for her. You're making a scene. You're mistaken, Walter, she replied, her voice remaining calm and carrying easily through the cavernous, silent room. You already made the scene. I am simply providing the context. She turned her attention back to the captivated audience. Their initial shock had morphed into a rapt, almost breathless curiosity. This was no longer just a marital spat. It was shaping up to be a legendary piece of society drama. My husband is right, Selina continued, her tone measured and reasonable, as if she were giving a lecture at a university. George Drake, my late father-in-law, was obsessed with legacy. He built this company, this foundation, not just as a monument to his wealth, but as a testament to a certain set of values he held dear. She began to walk slowly from behind the table, moving towards the center of the stage Walter had just vacated. Her every movement was deliberate, graceful, and commanded attention. The sapphire gown flowed around her, and under the spotlights, the Drake star at her neck glittered like a shard of ice. He spoke to me about these values often, she said, her voice imbued with a quiet, personal authority that made it clear this was not a guess, but a fact. He spoke of integrity, of loyalty, of the importance of one's family name and the responsibility to protect it from disgrace. Robert was leaning forward now, his drunken smirk gone, replaced by a look of intense, greedy focus. Margaret was watching Selina, as if seeing her for the first time, her mouth slightly agape. Even Giselle in her corner had lost her triumphant glow. A sliver of uncertainty had begun to creep into her expression. Walter stood up his chair, scraping loudly against the floor. That's enough, Selina. This is neither the time nor the place. On the contrary, Walter, she said, turning to face him fully now. I can't think of a more perfect time or place. You invited all these people here to witness your power. It seems only fitting they should also witness your inheritance. A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. Inheritance. Walter had inherited the company years ago. My father left me the controlling interest in the company. Walter snapped, his voice tight with fury. It's a matter of public record. What foolish game are you playing? I'm not playing a game, Selina said softly. But you are, and you've just lost. She turned her gaze to the side of the room, where a distinguished grey-haired man was standing by the entrance, a leather briefcase in his hand. Mr. Hawthorne, if you would. Jonathan Hawthorne, the Drake family lawyer for 40 years and the executor of George's will, stepped forward. He walked with a solemn purpose, his face grim and impassive. The sight of him, the keeper of all the family's secrets, sent a fresh wave of shock through the room. This was not a spontaneous emotional outburst. This was a planned, orchestrated event. Mr. Hawthorne reached the stage and stood beside Selina, a silent, formidable ally. Walter's face, which had been red with anger, was now beginning to pale. The first real seed of doubt had been planted. Hawthorne, what is the meaning of this? You work for me. No, Walter, the lawyer replied, his voice calm and firm. For the past 2 years, since your father's death, I have worked for his estate. My primary duty is not to you, but to executing his final wishes, to the letter. Mr. Hawthorne placed his briefcase on the lectern Walter had just used and clicked it open. The sound echoed in the silent room, like a judge's gavel. Selina addressed the room once more, her voice ringing with a strength no one there had ever heard from her. My father-in-law was a brilliant man. He was also a deeply perceptive one. He saw the potential for recklessness in his son. He worried that Walter's ambition was not tempered by wisdom, that his pursuit of personal gratification might one day jeopardize everything George had spent his life building. She took a deep breath, her hand never leaving her belly. And so he put a fail-safe in place, a final clause, a codicil to his last will and testament, known only to himself, to me, and to Mr. Hawthorne. Walter let out a short, incredulous laugh, but it was strained. The sweat was beginning to bead on his forehead. A secret clause. This is absurd. A fantasy. You're hysterical. Am I? Selina's voice was dangerously quiet. Miss Hawthorne, would you be so kind as to read the addendum to Article 4, Section 3 of the last will and testament of George T. Drake? The lawyer pulled out a sheaf of thick, cream-colored paper bound by a blue ribbon. He cleared his throat, and the room held its collective breath. The real performance was about to begin. Before Jonathan Hawthorne could begin, Selina held up a hand, a silent request for one more moment. She wanted the room, and especially Walter, to understand the foundation of what was about to happen. Before Mr. Hawthorne reads this, I want you all to understand why George Drake entrusted this to me, she said, her gaze sweeping across the stunned faces. When I married into this family, most of you saw me as an accessory, a quiet, suitable match for a powerful man. But George saw something else. He saw a librarian who loved books more than jewels. He saw someone who understood that a legacy isn't what you own, it's what you build and what you protect. A flashback, vivid and warm, filled her mind. She was in the estate library with George months before he passed. He was frail, his voice a soft rasp, but his eyes were sharp. He's a good businessman, my Walter George had said, looking out the window. He's a shark, and that's what you need to be sometimes. But a shark that forgets the sea it swims in will eventually beach itself. He lacks ballast, Selina. A moral anchor. He loves the trappings of the Drake name, but I fear he does not respect the weight of it. He had slid a sealed envelope across the polished mahogany desk. My lawyers have this. But I am giving you a copy, a key, for when you need it. Protect my legacy, my dear. Protect my grandchild. At the time, she hadn't even been pregnant. He had seen the future with a terrifying clarity. Her eyes refocused on the present. The memory had steeled her resolve. George Drake and I spent many hours in his library, discussing history, philosophy, and the nature of power. He knew that empires don't rot from external threats, but from internal corruption, from a decay of character at the very top. She nodded to Mr. Hawthorne. Please, Jonathan, it's time. The lawyer adjusted his spectacles and began to read, his voice dry and official, a stark contrast to the high-voltage drama unfolding. An addendum to Article 4, Section 3 concerning the transfer of controlling shares in Drake Industries, he began, the aforementioned shares constituting 51% of all voting stock, shall pass to my son, Walter Harrison Drake, under the following permanent and irrevocable condition. He paused for emphasis. Walter stood frozen, his face a ghastly shade of white. The entire room was leaning in. This inheritance is contingent upon my son, upholding the moral and ethical standards synonymous with the Drake family name. He is to act as a steward, not a sovereign. The leadership of Drake Industries must be synonymous with integrity, fidelity, and public decency. A gasp went through the crowd. This was not a standard legal document. It was a morality clause. An archaic, powerful, and deeply personal mandate from beyond the grave. Mr. Hawthorne continued his voice, unwavering. Should Walter Harrison Drake engage in any act of public scandal, egregious infidelity, or behavior that brings verifiable disgrace and disrepute upon the family name, this clause shall be triggered. Walter finally found his voice, a strangled, desperate sound. This is unenforceable. It's subjective. What court in the land would uphold such a thing? Allow me to finish, Walter, the lawyer said sternly, and then read the final devastating paragraph. Upon the triggering of this clause, verified by the executor of my estate, Walter Harrison Drake's controlling shares will be immediately and irrevocably forfeited. They shall not pass to any other family member directly. His eyes flickered towards Robert, whose jaw had dropped. Instead, they will be placed into a legally binding trust. The sole beneficiary of this trust will be Walter's firstborn legitimate child. The sole trustee granted full and autonomous voting power and control over the shares until the child reaches the age of 25 will be his wife at the time of the child's birth. Selina Miller Drake. Silence. A deep, profound, earth-shattering silence. Every single person in that room was doing the same mental calculation. Walter's public praise of his mistress, his flagrant disrespect for his pregnant wife, an act of public scandal, of egregious infidelity, of bringing disgrace upon the family name. He hadn't just met the conditions, he had fulfilled them in spectacular fashion in a ballroom filled with 100 witnesses. And Selina. Quiet, unassuming Selina. She was not just the wife. She was the fail-safe, the designated trustee, the one person George Drake had trusted to wield the power of his entire empire if his own son proved unworthy. Selina looked at Walter. All the arrogance, all the smug superiority had been stripped away. He looked like a man who had been struck by lightning. He stared at her, then at his unborn child she was carrying, and the full, horrifying scope of his miscalculation finally dawned on him. He hadn't just insulted his wife. He had handed her his crown. Giselle Dubois, the celebrated inspiration, looked as though she was about to be physically ill. The future she had envisioned, a life of limitless wealth and power as the unofficial queen of the Drake Empire, had just evaporated. She was no longer a symbol of Walter's power, but the very catalyst for his downfall. Selina took the microphone from the lectern. My husband asked if this was enforceable, she said, her voice clear and strong. He questioned what proof there could be. For the past 6 months, I have been gathering that proof. From his briefcase, Mr. Hawthorne produced a thick, spiral-bound file. This file, Selina stated, her gaze sweeping over the horrified faces of the Drakes, contains financial records, receipts for a penthouse apartment on Park Avenue, for a Porsche, for jewelry from Cartier. It contains sworn affidavits from staff, and of course dozens of photographs. She looked directly at Walter, her eyes holding no malice, only a profound and final certainty. You wanted a future of unapologetic truth, Walter. Here it is. You are no longer in control of Drake Industries. As of this moment, she placed a hand firmly on her stomach. Your son and I are. The fallout was immediate and explosive. You scheming bitch! Walter roared, his carefully constructed facade shattering into pure, undiluted rage. He took a step towards the stage, his hands clenched into fists, his face contorted with a fury that was genuinely frightening. Before he could take another step, 2 of the event's security guards, large men in discreet, dark suits, moved swiftly and silently to flank the stage, creating a human barrier. Mr. Hawthorne had thought of everything. "This is illegal. This won't stand. I will sue you into oblivion." Walter bellowed, his voice raw. He was no longer the charismatic king, but a cornered animal. He pointed a trembling finger at the lawyer. "Hawthorne, you're fired. You're disbarred." "You can't fire me, Walter," Mr. Hawthorne stated calmly, not flinching. "As I said, my client is the estate of George T. Drake. And as for being disbarred, I assure you every I has been dotted and every T has been crossed. Your father and I spent over a year constructing this codicil with a team of the best trust and estate lawyers in the country. It is ironclad." The guests, once silent, were now a buzzing hive of frantic whispers. Cell phones were being discreetly raised, recording the downfall of a titan. The governor, looking profoundly uncomfortable, was already being ushered out a side door by his security detail. The spectacle was over. The consequences were beginning. Robert Drake, seeing his brother's complete implosion, saw his chance. He scrambled to his feet, his face flushed with a mixture of shock and opportunism. "Kathy," he said, moving towards the stage, his voice oozing a false sincerity. "I had no idea. This is shocking. But I'm on your side. We can run the company together. I know the business inside and out. We can protect the family legacy, our legacy." Selina looked down at her brother-in-law, her expression one of utter disdain. "Your side, Robert. For 5 years, your side has been whichever one allowed you to watch my husband's cruelty with a smirk on your face. You saw this family's legacy as nothing more than a private spectator sport. The trust is clear. The power is mine as trustee for my son. I will not be needing a co-pilot whose primary motivation is resentment. Go and find yourself another drink." Robert recoiled, as if slapped, his face turning a blotchy red. He had misjudged her, completely seeing her only as a pawn to be used against his brother. He now realized she was the new queen, and he had just made a fool of himself. Meanwhile, Giselle Dubois was attempting to make a quiet exit. She had risen from her table and was slinking towards the ballroom doors, her crimson dress now looking garish and cheap in the harsh reality of the situation. "Miss Dubois." Selina's voice rang out, stopping her cold. Giselle froze her back to the stage. "A word of advice," Selina said, her voice devoid of emotion. "The penthouse, the car, the credit lines, they are all assets of a holding company owned and controlled by Drake Industries. I suggest you have your things packed by morning. The locks will be changed by noon." Without turning around, Giselle fled the room. The sound of her heels clicking frantically on the marble floor was the only sound for a moment, a pathetic punctuation mark on the end of her spectacular rise and fall. Finally, Selina's eyes settled on her mother-in-law. Margaret was ashen, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. She looked from her raging, defeated son to her poised, powerful daughter-in-law, her face a canvas of confusion and fear. She had spent her life navigating the orbits of powerful men, first George, then Walter. The idea of this quiet young woman, now holding all the cards, was a concept her mind could barely grasp. The fight had gone out of Walter. His rage had collapsed into a hollow, gaping shock. He looked around the room at the faces of his peers, his friends, his rivals, and saw not respect or fear, but a mixture of pity and morbid fascination. He was a story, a cautionary tale. In one evening, he had lost everything that mattered to him, his power, his company, his public face. He looked at Selina, truly looked at her for the first time in years. He saw not the timid librarian he'd married, but a strategist of formidable skill. She had endured his neglect, his affairs, his public humiliation, all while quietly laying the groundwork for this moment. She hadn't just reacted to his cruelty, she had used it, weaponized it with his own father's words. "Why?" He whispered the question barely audible. "You never saw me, Walter," she said, her voice softening, not with pity but with a sad finality. "You saw a reflection of what you wanted, a suitable wife, a future mother for your heir. But you never saw me, George did. He saw that I would protect his legacy, especially from the one person he feared could destroy it. You. Tonight you proved him right." She turned to Mr. Hawthorne. "I think we're done here. Please arrange for a board meeting at 9 a.m. tomorrow. They will need to be formally introduced to their new trustee." Mr. Hawthorne nodded. "Of course, Mrs. Drake." Selina turned and walked off the stage, her head held high. She didn't look back at the wreckage of her husband's life. She didn't glance at the stunned guests. She walked with a steady, unhurried pace towards the exit, a woman who had just emerged from a gilded cage, not as a victim, but as the master of her own and her son's destiny. The 10 days that followed the gala were a maelstrom of legal fury and media frenzy. Walter, stripped of his power in the most public way imaginable, did not go quietly. He marshaled a team of ruthless corporate litigators who descended with the ferocity of a sharknado, filing a barrage of motions and injunctions. They painted Selina as a manipulative gold digger, a hysterical pregnant woman, and a conniving usurper. The headlines were lurid, a feast for the tabloids who had chronicled the Drakes for years. Selina, however, remained sequestered within the stone walls of the North Salem estate, a calm eye in the center of the hurricane. She spent her mornings on the phone with Jonathan Hawthorne, her voice a steady counterpoint to the legal chaos he described. He's filing for an emergency stay, claiming undue influence over his father. Jonathan reported one morning, his voice weary but resolute. His lawyers are arguing that George was not of sound mind when he wrote the codicil. Selina sat in the sun-drenched library, a cup of chamomile tea steaming beside her. And the proof we have of his father's lucidity. Videotaped depositions from his neurologists, his staff, and a signed affidavit from his cardiologist, all dated the week of the codicil's signing. George insisted on it. He told me, "Walter will attack my mind when he can no longer attack my words." As always, he was 3 steps ahead. "And the claim of my mental instability?" Selina asked, one hand resting on the gentle swell of her belly. A desperate misogynistic ploy that the judge, a woman with 3 daughters, did not appreciate. It was dismissed with prejudice an hour ago. Jonathan said, a rare hint of satisfaction in his tone. "He is flailing, Selina, throwing everything at a wall of granite, hoping something sticks. Nothing will. The foundation George built is too strong." And so it was. One by one, Walter's challenges were swatted down, his legal attacks crumbling against the ironclad foresight of his father's will. Finally, the courts issued their final affirmation. The Spencer Drake Trust was the undisputed owner of the controlling shares of Drake Industries and Selina Miller. Drake was its sole trustee. The storm had broken. Her first act was to call an emergency board meeting. As she was driven into Manhattan, the city skyline piercing the crisp morning air, she felt a tremor of nerves, a flutter of the old insecurity. But then she felt a kick from her son, a small, powerful reminder of her purpose. Her fear sublimated into resolve. She walked into the top-floor boardroom alone. The air was thick with tension and hostility. 10 powerful men, titans of industry who had hitched their wagons to Walter's star sat around a vast obsidian table. Their faces were grim masks of skepticism. She saw Walter's right-hand man, Peterson, a bulldog of a man with a perpetually condescending sneer, watching her as if she were an exotic and unwelcome insect. Selina took her seat at the head of the table, Walter's seat. The chair felt large, a throne built for a different kind of ruler. She adjusted herself, her posture poised and straight. "Good morning, gentlemen," she said. Her voice quiet, but carrying a surprising weight in the acoustically perfect room. "I know this has been an unconventional transition. I'm sure you have many questions and concerns. Let me be clear. I am not here to liquidate this company. I am not here for revenge." Her gaze traveled around the table, meeting each man's eyes before moving to the next. She did not challenge them, but she did not look away. "My only agenda is to ensure that when my son inherits this company, it is stronger, more stable, and more respected than it is today." Peterson leaned back, crossing his arms with an audible scoff. "With all due respect, Mrs. Drake," he began, his tone dripping with condescension, "your agenda is admirable, but irrelevant. What does a librarian, however well-intentioned, know about navigating global markets or running a multi-billion-dollar corporation? Walter, for all his faults, was a shark. We need a shark." Selina offered him a small, placid smile that did not reach her eyes. "A librarian, Mr. Peterson, knows how to do research. It's a skill you seem to underestimate." She slid a thin folder onto the center of the table. "In that folder is my provisional plan. We will be divesting from the 3 high-risk tech ventures my husband acquired in the last fiscal year, ventures that are collectively down 9% and have exposed this company to significant market volatility. We will be reinvesting that capital into our core assets, modernizing our shipping fleet, and upgrading our manufacturing facilities areas that have been neglected." She then looked directly at Peterson. "You mention the need for a shark. Sharks are predators driven by instinct. But sometimes a historian is more useful. For the past 2 years, I have been in the estate library. I've read every annual report, every shareholder letter, and every set of board minutes since 1975. In 1999, for example, George Drake pulled the company out of a series of speculative .com investments, choosing instead to shore up our tangible assets. According to the minutes, Mr. Peterson, you advised strongly against that move, calling it timid. 6 months later, the bubble burst, and George's timidity saved this company from catastrophic losses, while your shark-like instincts would have led it off a cliff. A stunned silence fell over the room. Peterson's face went from ruddy to pale. She hadn't just disagreed with him. She had produced a receipt for his own past failure, a fact he had likely assumed was buried in dusty archives. Selina leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to a steely, quiet tone. "This company thrived not because of one man's ego, but because of a team of dedicated people guided by a wise and prudent leader. I am here to restore that vision. If you share that agenda, you will have a place at this table. If your loyalty lies with the man who nearly gambled it all away for the sake of his pride, then I advise you to start updating your resumes. Security can validate your parking on the way out." The challenge was absolute. The power dynamic in the room had been irrevocably altered. They no longer saw a librarian. They saw the true heir to George Drake's iron will and meticulous mind. The meeting concluded 20 minutes later. The board had approved her provisional plan, unanimously. Returning to the estate felt different. The house itself seemed to exhale alongside her. In the days that followed, she began to reclaim the space. She had the cold, abstract sculptures Walter had favored removed from the hallways and replaced them with landscape paintings that her father-in-law had loved. The oppressive museum-like silence was broken by the quiet, classical music she played in the afternoons. The staff, who had always moved with a tense, fearful deference around Walter, began to smile more openly. The entire home began to breathe again. A month after the gala, Jonathan Hawthorne came to the estate. He found her not in the library or the study, but in the nursery, personally arranging tiny clothes in a dresser drawer. The room was bathed in the soft afternoon light, a sanctuary of peace and anticipation. "The final papers, Selina," he said gently, holding out a file. "The divorce settlement. Walter has signed them. He's not contesting anything any longer." She took the file, her hands steady. "And him? What will he do? He and Robert are in Monaco. They took the settlement and are trying to launch some sort of hedge fund." Jonathan said, his expression grim. "He's chasing the shadow of what he lost. I doubt it will end well for him. He had the kingdom, but he never understood what made it strong." He paused, looking around the peaceful room. "George would be so proud of you. He didn't just leave you his company. He left it to the only person he knew would treat it as a legacy, not a piggy bank." Selina felt a swell of emotion, a mixture of gratitude for the old man's faith, and a quiet sorrow for the man Walter could have been. She walked over to the changing table, a piece of furniture that represented the future, not the past, and uncapped a pen. With a firm, steady hand, she signed her name, severing the final tie to her old life. It was done. After Mr. Hawthorne left, she stood at the large nursery window, looking out over the rolling hills and manicured lawns of her domain. The weight of it all, the company, the fortune, the family name, settled on her shoulders. It was a heavy burden, one she had never asked for. But as she felt the powerful, reassuring kick of her son, she knew she was not alone in carrying it. This was his birthright, his legacy. She was merely its first guardian. She had faced down the arrogance and cruelty of a powerful man, not with rage, but with quiet preparation and unshakable truth. She had emerged from the gilded cage, not broken, but transformed. She was no longer just a wife or a mother-to-be. She was Selina Drake, the matriarch, standing sentinel over a new beginning, ready to build a future worthy of the life stirring within her. And that's where Selina's story truly begins. It's a powerful reminder that strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet resolve of a person who has been pushed too far, who has been underestimated, and who has been preparing in the shadows. Selina Drake teaches us that true power isn't about the money you have or the people you control. It's about integrity, foresight, and the courage to protect what truly matters. She didn't just win a company. She reclaimed her life and secured a future for her child, proving that the best laid plans of arrogant men are no match for a determined woman armed with the truth. If this story of betrayal, resilience, and ultimate victory moved you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who appreciates a story of quiet strength winning the day. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Click that notification bell so you never miss an update.